The stadium lights dim, and a hush ripples through 65,000 voices like a sudden intake of breath. You can feel it in your chest, the electricity in the air, the collective heartbeat of a crowd waiting for a legend. Then through the fog and the screams, one figure steps into the spotlight. Michael Jackson raises his hand. The music begins. And in that exact moment, somewhere deep in the crowd, a 9-year-old boy with a face marked by fire looks up and locks eyes with him. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss another untold story. This is not just a concert story. This is not just another tale about Michael Jackson's generosity or compassion. This is the true story of a boy who thought he would never be seen again, and a moment when the king of pop stopped the world to make sure he was. It was July 16, 1988, and Wembley Stadium was alive in a way that few places ever are. London's summer air carried the hum of anticipation, layered with the echo of laughter, chatter, and the distant sound of vendors calling out for drinks and souvenirs. From the highest rows of the stadium to the front barricades near the stage, fans from all over the world had gathered, united by one thing: Michael Jackson was in the building. This was the Bad World Tour, a spectacle that would go down as one of the greatest tours in music history. Michael Jackson had already shattered records across continents, selling out arenas, rewriting what it meant to be a live performer. Wembley alone would host him for 7 nights, an unprecedented achievement at the time. But on this particular night, something extraordinary was about to happen that no one, not even Michael himself, could have planned. Somewhere in the sea of faces was a small boy named Daniel Cooper. Daniel was 9 years old, but life had already taken more from him than most people lose in a lifetime. 2 years earlier, Daniel's world had changed in a single horrifying night. A fire broke out in his family's home, spreading faster than anyone could react. Flames climbed walls, smoke swallowed rooms, and in the chaos, Daniel was trapped. When firefighters finally pulled him out, his body was alive, but his face, arms, and torso bore the marks of a battle he never chose to fight. Severe burns left him scarred, not just physically but emotionally. Skin grafts, surgeries, hospital rooms, and months of recovery became his new reality. Mirrors became his enemy. School became a battlefield of whispers, stares, and questions he didn't know how to answer. Children could be cruel, but even when they weren't, their silence was often worse. Daniel began to believe that his face was something to hide, something that disqualified him from being seen as normal, lovable, or even human. He stopped wanting to go outside. He stopped wanting to be photographed. He stopped wanting to be seen. His mother, Sarah Cooper, watched her once joyful, energetic boy retreat into himself. She saw the way he flinched when people looked at him too long. She saw how he pulled his hoodie tighter, how he avoided eye contact, how he shrank in public spaces. And like any mother, she was desperate to find something, anything, that could remind her son that he was still a child, still worthy of joy, still allowed to dream. That something came from an unlikely place. Daniel loved Michael Jackson. Even in the hospital, even through pain and bandages, Michael's music had been a constant presence in Daniel's life. Nurses would play Beat It, Billie Jean, and Bad through small radios or televisions. Daniel would listen quietly, sometimes tapping his fingers, sometimes humming under his breath. Michael Jackson, with his high voice, his impossible dance moves, and his otherworldly presence, felt like someone from another planet, someone who existed above cruelty, above judgment, above pain. For Daniel, Michael Jackson wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol of magic. Sarah noticed this. She saw the way Daniel's eyes lit up when Michael appeared on screen. She saw the way his posture changed, the way his shoulders relaxed, the way a smile returned, even if only briefly. And so she made a decision that seemed almost impossible. She would take her son to see Michael Jackson live. Not just on television, not just on a VHS tape, but in person, at Wembley Stadium. The problem was, getting tickets to the Bad World Tour in 1988 was nearly impossible. Shows sold out within minutes. Scalpers charged outrageous prices. Lines formed overnight. And Sarah was a single mother with limited resources, medical bills piling up, and a child who needed more than she could give him. But she didn't give up. She wrote letters. She called promoters. She reached out to radio stations. She told Daniel's story to anyone who would listen. She wasn't asking for special treatment. She wasn't asking for backstage passes. She just wanted 2 seats in a stadium among strangers so her son could feel part of something bigger than his pain. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, against all odds, she succeeded. 2 tickets arrived in the mail. Daniel didn't fully understand what it meant at first. When his mother told him they were going to see Michael Jackson live, he thought she was joking. He thought she was being kind. He thought it was one of those things adults say to make children feel better, like everything will be okay or someday you'll understand. But then she showed him the tickets. Real tickets. Wembley Stadium. July 16, 1988. Daniel stared at them like they were pieces of another universe. He touched them carefully as if they might disappear. For the first time in a long time, something shifted inside him. Not confidence, not happiness exactly, but hope. Still, as the day approached, Daniel became anxious. He was terrified of being in a crowd. He was terrified of people seeing his face. He was terrified of being stared at, whispered about, pitied, or mocked. The idea of sitting among 65,000 strangers felt overwhelming. It felt like stepping into a spotlight he didn't ask for. And yet, he wanted to go. He wanted to see Michael Jackson. He wanted to hear his voice live. He wanted to feel that magic he had only known through speakers and screens. On the day of the concert, Sarah helped Daniel get dressed. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, even though it was warm. He pulled his hood up, just enough to feel hidden. She knelt in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and told him something he would never forget. "You don't have to hide tonight," she said. "But if you want to, that's okay too. Just remember you're not alone." Daniel nodded. They arrived at Wembley hours before the show. The stadium loomed above them like a giant concrete cathedral. Outside, fans were already singing, dancing, and shouting Michael's name. Some wore replica jackets, gloves, and hats. Others held signs, flags, and banners. The energy was unreal. As they made their way inside, Daniel's heart pounded. Every step felt heavy. Every glance from a stranger felt like a spotlight. He stayed close to his mother, his eyes mostly on the ground. But when they reached their seats and the stage came into view, something inside him shifted again. The stage was massive, a futuristic structure of lights, screens, and metal. It didn't look like a normal stage. It looked like a spaceship. And somewhere behind it, Michael Jackson was preparing to come out. The stadium darkened. The screams began. A single note echoed through the speakers. Then another. Then a drumbeat. And suddenly there he was. Michael Jackson rose through the stage floor in a cloud of smoke, standing perfectly still, dressed in black, wearing his signature jacket and glove, his silhouette instantly recognizable. The crowd erupted. The sound was so loud it felt physical, like a wave crashing into the body. Daniel froze. He had never heard anything like this, never felt anything like this. The noise, the lights, the energy, it was overwhelming but also thrilling. For a moment, he forgot about his scars. He forgot about his fear. He forgot about everything except the man on stage. Michael Jackson stood motionless, letting the screams wash over him. Then he snapped into motion and the show began. "Wanna be startin' something." "Smooth Criminal." "Another Part of Me." Each song flowed into the next like a dream, and Daniel found himself slowly lifting his head, slowly looking around, slowly allowing himself to be present. He clapped. He cheered. He even sang along quietly, his voice lost in the roar of thousands. For the first time since the fire, Daniel felt invisible in a good way, not erased but blended. He wasn't the boy with scars. He wasn't the patient. He wasn't the victim. He was just a fan in a crowd, sharing a moment with tens of thousands of others. And then midway through the show, the music changed. The lights softened. The tempo slowed. The opening chords of Man in the Mirror filled the stadium. This was one of Michael Jackson's most powerful songs, a song about self-reflection, compassion, and change. The crowd grew quiet, almost reverent. Phone screens didn't exist yet, but thousands of people raised their lighters, creating a sea of flickering lights that shimmered like stars. Michael stepped forward, his voice soft but commanding. "I'm gonna make a change." As he sang, he scanned the crowd, his eyes moving slowly across the stadium. Michael Jackson had always been known for his connection with his audience. He didn't just perform for crowds, he performed to them. He looked at them. He felt them. And on this night, something in the crowd caught his attention. At first, he didn't know what it was. Just a feeling. A pull. Like a tug at his heart. His eyes paused. Then returned. Then paused again. Somewhere in the middle tiers of Wembley Stadium, among thousands of faces, Michael saw a small boy whose face told a story of pain, survival, and courage. Daniel. Michael didn't know his name. He didn't know his story. He didn't know what had happened to him. But he saw him. And something inside Michael stopped. It wasn't pity. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Michael Jackson had lived a life of being seen and misunderstood. He knew what it felt like to be stared at, judged, and defined by appearance. He knew what it felt like to be different, to be isolated, to be misunderstood. And in that moment, standing on a stage in front of 65,000 people, he saw a child who carried pain in his face and loneliness in his eyes. Michael kept singing, but his attention stayed locked on that one small figure in the crowd. Daniel felt it. At first, he didn't realize what was happening. He just felt a strange sensation, like the air around him had shifted. Then he looked up. And Michael Jackson was looking directly at him. Not near him. Not past him. At him. Daniel froze. His heart stopped. His body felt heavy, like it had turned to stone. For a second, he thought he was imagining it. But Michael didn't look away. He held his gaze. And then something unbelievable happened. Michael stopped singing. The music continued for a moment, then faded. The crowd gasped. 65,000 people went silent. In the middle of one of the most anticipated concerts in the world, Michael Jackson had stopped the show. He lowered his microphone slightly, still looking in Daniel's direction. Then he spoke. "There's a little boy out there," Michael said softly, his voice echoing through the stadium. "I can see him, and I just want him to know something." Daniel's mother felt her heart leap into her throat. She followed Michael's gaze. She saw her son, frozen in his seat, his face pale, his eyes wide. Michael raised his hand, pointing gently toward Daniel's section. "You're beautiful," he said. "You're beautiful just the way you are." The stadium erupted, not with screams but with applause. A wave of sound rolled through Wembley, not chaotic but unified. It was the sound of tens of thousands of people clapping not for a performance, but for a child. Daniel didn't understand what was happening at first. He heard the applause. He saw people turning toward him. He felt his mother's hand gripping his arm. He felt tears in his eyes, but he didn't know why. Then Michael spoke again. "You're not alone," he said, "and you never will be." And with that, he lifted the microphone back to his lips and continued singing Man in the Mirror. But the song was no longer the same. It was no longer just lyrics. It had become a living moment of compassion, connection, and humanity. Daniel began to cry. Not quietly. Not softly. He cried openly, uncontrollably, the kind of cry that comes from a place so deep it doesn't ask permission. His shoulders shook. His breath caught in his throat. His mother wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her own face, unable to speak. For the first time since the fire, Daniel felt something he had forgotten existed. He felt seen, not stared at, not judged. Seen by the one person in that stadium who mattered most to him. Michael Jackson. After the song ended, the applause continued. Michael stood still, his head bowed slightly as if absorbing the weight of the moment. Then he spoke again. "I want to dedicate this next song to him," Michael said. "And to anyone out there who's ever felt different, you're not alone. I love you." The next song began, but for Daniel, the night had already reached its peak. Everything after that felt like a dream layered on top of another dream. When the concert ended and the stadium lights came back on, Daniel sat quietly, still trying to process what had happened. His face felt warm, not from the lights, but from the tears that had dried there. His chest felt full in a way he didn't recognize. People around him smiled at him. Some gave him thumbs up, some nodded, some simply looked at him with kindness. No one stared. No one whispered. No one mocked. They saw him, and they smiled. As Sarah and Daniel made their way out of Wembley, something unexpected happened. A security guard approached them. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you the boy Michael pointed out during the show?" Sarah hesitated, protective instinct kicking in. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Mr. Jackson would like to meet you," the guard said. Daniel's heart skipped. "What?" he whispered. Sarah felt dizzy. "Michael wants to meet him," she asked. "Yes," the guard said, "if you're willing." Daniel looked up at his mother, his eyes wide. "Mom," he said softly, "Michael Jackson wants to meet me." Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. They were led through a maze of corridors, backstage tunnels, and security checkpoints. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by the hum of equipment, the murmur of crew members, and the distant echo of music still ringing in Daniel's ears. Finally, they reached a door. A simple door. Behind it was one of the most famous people on Earth. The guard knocked. A soft voice answered, "Come in." The door opened. Michael Jackson stood inside. Up close he seemed smaller than he had on stage, but his presence was just as powerful. He wore the same outfit from the performance, his hair slightly damp with sweat, his face calm and gentle. When he saw Daniel, he smiled. Not a stage smile. Not a celebrity smile. A human smile. "Hi," Michael said softly, kneeling down so he was eye level with Daniel. "What's your name?" Daniel swallowed. "Daniel," he whispered. Michael extended his hand. "I'm Michael," he said. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook it. Michael's hand was warm. "Daniel," Michael said, "I saw you out there. I wanted to make sure you know how special you are." Daniel didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what he was feeling. I love your music," he finally said. Michael smiled. "Thank you," he said, "but more importantly, I love you." Sarah felt her knees weaken. Michael turned to her. "You've raised a brave boy," he said gently. Tears streamed down her face. "Thank you," she said. "You have no idea what this means to him." Michael nodded. "I think I do," he said quietly. He spent several minutes talking to Daniel, asking him about his favorite songs, his favorite foods, his favorite games. He didn't rush. He didn't glance at the clock. He didn't treat the moment like a formality. To Michael Jackson, Daniel wasn't a fan. He was a child. A human being. Someone who deserved attention, kindness, and dignity. Before they left, Michael gave Daniel something he would treasure forever. He removed his glove. Not just any glove. The glove, the iconic white glove, sparkling under the lights, synonymous with his image around the world. He placed it in Daniel's hands. "I want you to have this," Michael said, "to remind you that you're strong, you're loved, and you're never alone." Daniel stared at the glove, unable to speak. "Thank you," he finally whispered. Michael leaned in and hugged him. Not a quick hug. Not a polite hug. A real hug. The kind that says, "I see you." The kind that says, "You matter." When Sarah and Daniel finally left Wembley that night, they were no longer the same people who had arrived. Something had changed. Not the scars. Not the past. But the future. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's behavior began to shift. He stood a little taller. He spoke a little louder. He looked people in the eye a little longer. He started going outside again. He stopped hiding his face as much. He still struggled. He still had bad days. Healing, especially emotional healing, is never a straight line, but something fundamental had changed. Daniel no longer believed he was unworthy of being seen. He no longer believed he had to hide. He no longer believed he was alone. The moment at Wembley had become a story his family told and retold, not as a celebrity encounter, but as a turning point. A night when the most famous man in the world stopped everything to remind a small boy that he was beautiful. Michael Jackson never publicly spoke about the incident in interviews. He didn't turn it into a headline. He didn't use it for publicity. He didn't mention it in documentaries or memoirs. But those who were there never forgot it. Fans in the stadium that night would later describe it as one of the most emotional moments they had ever witnessed at a concert. Some said they cried without even knowing why. Some said they felt something shift in their hearts. Some said they left the stadium changed. Because that moment wasn't just about Daniel. It was about all of us. It was about the idea that in a world obsessed with appearance, success, and perfection, a single act of compassion can cut through everything. Michael Jackson, often portrayed as larger than life, proved that night that what made him truly great wasn't his voice, his dance moves, or his fame. It was his heart. Years passed. Daniel grew older. The scars remained, but they no longer defined him. He went to school. He made friends. He laughed. He dreamed. And every now and then, he would look at the glove Michael gave him, or replay that moment in his mind, the moment when the world stopped and a superstar spoke directly to his soul. In later years, when asked about the most important moment of his childhood, Daniel didn't talk about birthdays or holidays. He talked about Wembley. He talked about Man in the Mirror. He talked about the night Michael Jackson saw him. Not as a scarred boy, but as a beautiful human being. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Michael Jackson. Not just the albums, not just the records, not just the moonwalk, but the moments, the unseen moments, the quiet moments, the moments when he used his platform not to elevate himself, but to lift someone else. In a world that often celebrates fame, Michael Jackson showed that compassion is the greatest performance of all. As the years have gone by, stories like this one have surfaced again and again, stories of hospital visits, private donations, letters, phone calls, and quiet acts of kindness. Some were documented, many were not, but all of them point to the same truth. Michael Jackson didn't just sing about love, healing, and unity. He lived it. And on that night in 1988, in front of 65,000 people, he proved it in the most powerful way possible. He stopped the show. He stopped time. And he changed one boy's life forever. And yet, the story does not end at Wembley. Because moments like that do not simply fade into memory. They ripple outward, quietly reshaping lives, choices, and futures in ways no one can fully predict. In the months following that night, Daniel returned to school carrying more than just the iconic glove Michael Jackson had given him. He carried something far more powerful, a renewed sense of worth. The world hadn't suddenly become kind. Children still stared. Some still whispered. Some still asked questions that hurt, even when they didn't mean to. But Daniel no longer shrank under those moments. He no longer felt like he had to disappear to survive. Instead, he began to answer. Sometimes softly, sometimes confidently, sometimes with humor. When classmates asked, "What happened to your face?" Daniel would pause, then say, "I survived a fire." And then he would add, "And I met Michael Jackson." That second part often surprised people. It shifted the narrative. It turned pity into curiosity. It turned silence into conversation. It turned a story of trauma into a story of connection. Teachers noticed the change too. Daniel started raising his hand more. He began participating in class. He joined group activities. He even auditioned for a small role in a school play, a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. When Sarah watched him walk onto that small stage, under bright lights, surrounded by other children, she felt tears fill her eyes, not because of fear, but because of gratitude. She remembered the boy who once refused to leave the house, who hid from mirrors, who flinched at the sound of laughter. And now, here he was, standing tall, speaking lines, being seen. And she knew. That night at Wembley had planted a seed. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instant healing. But it was something. It was the beginning. As Daniel grew older, he began to understand more about who Michael Jackson really was, not just as a performer, but as a person. He watched interviews, documentaries, and behind-the-scenes footage. He saw Michael visiting hospitals, orphanages, and children's homes around the world. He learned about Michael's own childhood, his struggles, his isolation, and his complicated relationship with fame. And something clicked. Daniel realized that the moment at Wembley wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It was part of who Michael Jackson was. Michael had always had a deep connection with children, not in the way tabloids twisted and distorted, but in a way that came from his own lost childhood. He often said he felt he never truly got to be a child, and that he found joy, comfort, and healing in bringing happiness to others, especially children. Michael saw innocence. Michael saw vulnerability. Michael saw pain. And he responded with love. For Daniel, this understanding deepened the impact of that night. It wasn't just that Michael had noticed him. It was that Michael had recognized something familiar. A shared experience of being misunderstood, isolated, and defined by things beyond one's control. In many ways, Daniel and Michael were mirrors of each other. One a child scarred by fire, the other a man scarred by fame. And in that shared humanity, something powerful had happened. Years later, Daniel would be invited to speak at events focused on burn survivors and childhood trauma. At first, he was nervous. Public speaking had never been something he imagined doing. But when organizers asked him to share his story, he felt something inside him stir. He agreed. The first time he stood at a podium, his hands shook, his voice trembled, his heart pounded, but then he remembered Wembley. He remembered Michael's voice. "You're beautiful just the way you are." And he spoke. He told his story, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a story of survival. He talked about the fire. He talked about the pain. He talked about the scars. But most importantly, he talked about the moment when a stranger in the crowd became the center of a stadium, and how that moment changed the way he saw himself forever. People cried. People clapped. People came up to him afterward, some with tears in their eyes, some with scars of their own, some with children who had been burned, injured, or traumatized. "You gave me hope," One woman told him. "My son needed to hear that," another said. "You made me feel seen," a man whispered. And Daniel realized something profound. The moment Michael Jackson had given him was now being passed forward, not as a story about a celebrity, but as a story about kindness, about visibility, about dignity, about the power of one human being to change another's life with a single act of compassion. Meanwhile, the legend of that Wembley moment continued to grow. Fans who had been in the stadium began sharing their experiences online as the internet grew and social media emerged. Stories surfaced on forums, in fan communities, and in documentaries. People described how the entire stadium had gone silent, how the energy had shifted, how it felt like time had stopped. Some fans said they remembered exactly where they were sitting. Some said they remembered the exact words Michael had spoken. Some said they remembered the look on his face. And some said they remembered the boy. Not his name, not his story, but his presence. A small figure in a massive crowd. A child who became the heart of a stadium. And with every retelling, the story took on a life of its own, not as a rumor, but as a reminder of who Michael Jackson truly was beneath the glitter, the controversy, and the myth. As the years passed, Michael Jackson's life became increasingly complex. The weight of fame, the pressure of expectations, and the relentless scrutiny of the media took their toll. His public image became a battleground of admiration and controversy, praise and suspicion, devotion and doubt. But for Daniel, none of that could erase the man he met backstage at Wembley. None of that could erase the voice that told him he was beautiful. None of that could erase the hug. None of that could erase the glove. For Daniel, Michael Jackson would always be the man who stopped a concert to see a boy no one else saw. And that memory became his anchor. When life became difficult, when self-doubt crept back in, when scars, both physical and emotional, felt heavy again, Daniel would return to that moment in his mind. He would remember the stadium lights, the silence, the applause, the words. And he would stand a little taller. He would breathe a little deeper. He would remember who he was. As Daniel entered his teenage years, he faced new challenges. Adolescence is difficult for anyone, but for someone with visible scars, it can feel like walking through a storm without shelter. Dating, friendships, identity, and self-image all became new battlegrounds. There were moments when Daniel felt the old fears return. Moments when he felt invisible again. Moments when he questioned his worth. But there were also moments when he chose differently. When a classmate invited him to a party, he went even though he was afraid. When a girl smiled at him, he smiled back even though he didn't believe it was meant for him. When someone stared, he didn't look away. When someone asked, he answered. He didn't hide. He didn't shrink. He didn't disappear. Because he remembered what it felt like to be seen by the most famous person in the world. And he realized that if Michael Jackson could see beauty in him, then surely he could learn to see it in himself. During this time, Daniel also began to explore creative outlets. He wrote poetry. He kept a journal. He experimented with music, not because he wanted to be famous, but because he wanted to express what he had been through. Words became a way to make sense of pain. Music became a way to release emotion. Art became a way to turn scars into stories. One of his poems, written when he was 16, began with a line that would later be shared widely. I was burned by fire but healed by a voice. That voice, of course, was Michael Jackson's. And that line captured the essence of his journey, not as a fairy tale, but as a truth. Fire had taken something from him. A voice had given something back. Not his skin, not his past, but his sense of self. As Daniel grew into adulthood, he chose a career path that surprised no one who knew his story. He became a counselor, not because he wanted to fix people, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he wanted to sit with others in their pain and remind them that they were not alone. He specialized in trauma recovery, working particularly with children and adolescents who had experienced burns, accidents, or disfigurement. In hospital rooms and therapy offices, he sat with kids who hid their faces, who avoided mirrors, who believed they were broken, unlovable, or invisible. And he would tell them his story. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of compassion, and if it made you see Michael Jackson not just as an icon, but as a human being who used his platform to uplift others, then let this be more than just something you heard. Let it be something you carry. Let it be something you share. Let it be something you live. Please subscribe, like, and share this story so that more people can be reminded not only of the music of Michael Jackson, but of the humanity behind it.